Host Kit Kilstow coming to you live from the office cabin in the Missouri Ozarks. And today I am joined by TJ Radcliffe, and we're going to be talking about his book, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight and Ham, which sounds like it'll be a lot of fun to talk about. As always, I want to give the brief warning that I have my office cat, so, hopefully she won't interrupt the stream, but if she does, well, she's a cat. She does what she wants. And I also want to give a brief programming note. This will be our last show until after the new year. So we're going to take a break here for the holidays for the next couple of weeks, and then we will come back the first Wednesday in January. So welcome, TJ. I am so glad to have you join us. Would you mind telling our listeners and our viewers just a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Kit. Yeah, I'm a Canadian. I lived in the US for a while. Um, I'm a physicist and engineer by education, but I have written and written poetry, written plays, written a little for short film for many years, and have drifted increasingly toward narrative poetry as apparently the place that I'm happy. So I've been very focused on that for the last few years. I've semi dropped out of the technology world, and my wife and I moved to Gabriel Island off Canada's west coast about 5 years ago, where we live now.
Well, great, great. So, um, I think we should probably begin by identifying what narrative poetry is, because I think of poetry and I think of like a very specific like form and function. So could you describe a little bit what narrative poetry is?
Yeah, well, it's literally poetry that tells a story. So you could say all the way back to Homer or Gilgamesh. These they're epics in the sense the story they tell is very large scale, but they're still telling a story. They're not uh, something uh, like the famous poem about the fellow eating the plums. That's not really telling a story. It's capturing a moment in time. And short poems, which is what a lot of people are familiar with from school or other exposure, or even songs, which are a form of poetry, are what I think of as being the literature of moments. They capture this instant. A haiku is probably the most extreme example of that, where it's a moment in time, it's a feeling, it's an experience, and that's it. Whereas a narrative poem has temporality. It carries a story. It's about characters doing things. It has plot. It has action. It has dialogue, uh, at least potentially, in the same way that a novel would have. And in fact, what I'm writing, I categories are hard, right? But we need to put names on things. And if I put a name on the kind of thing that I'm doing, focused on now, it is a novel informal verse. So I want to bring in all of the machinery of the modern novel with psychological insight and plot and character and development and story arcs and subplots, while at the same time doing it in formal verse. I write formal metrical poetry of various kinds. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight and Ham is mostly in what's called anapestic tetrameter, which a lot of us are familiar with from Dr. Seuss or Robert Service is kind of the da 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 da. It's a very fun, bouncy rhythm, but at the same time, it has a naturalness to it that I found very surprising when I was working on this. Some of the stuff you can read and almost forget it's poetry. It's just words on a page. So that's what narrative poetry is. It's ordinary narrative storytelling that happens to be wrapped in a poetic or metrical package.
Well, thank you. That's very helpful and interesting because while I certainly got the Dr. Seuss reference from your title, I didn't really think of Dr. Seuss as a form of poetry, but yeah, I mean it very much is. It's a story and it's in verse and
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. And we have this idea that that kind of story is for kids. And either, I guess, I mean, kind of, you know, aren't we all just kids inside? But why don't we have stories like this as adults? It went out of fashion probably 100 years ago. uh, the Probably the last really major long narrative poem in English was Tennyson's Arthur, which was published in segments in the 1850s. Uh, and then novels took over, and they became the thing. And what I'm trying to do is steal from from novels. And I've tried to write novels. I'm not very good at it. Uh, Whereas if you wrap these things up in verse, suddenly it becomes much easier for me. I don't know why.
No, it makes a lot of sense to me. We all have different strengths and you know,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yes, some things
Yeah.
come easier to others.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And there, sorry, go ahead.
oh no, you
Yeah.
go.
Well, there have been a few instances of uh, significant novels in formal verse in the last 20 or 30 years. Golden Gate by Vikram Seth, which is told in Pushkin sonnets, which is a very formal thing. I am nowhere near, that's like high formal, because he's got a very strict structure and strict rhyme scheme, and effectively every chapter is just a single sonnet. Really, really challenging. Uh, and there is a book by an author whose name I forget because I'm terrible with names, called The Marlowe Papers, award-winning novel in verse, written in Shakespearean blank verse, so unrhymed iambic pentameter, which is a much more flexible form, and I work in it a lot because you can tell stories and you still have this poetic rhythmicity that seems natural to me.
Interesting. I may have to check those out. I have to admit, I've pretty much worked in novels for the past 20 plus years, so this is all new territory for me.
It's a pretty niche genre, I guess. I'm pitching a work at the moment, which is a riff on Romeo and Juliet, called Capulet and Monterite, about a world that is divided by handedness. And I'm ambidextrous personally, and and so this idea of division by handedness kind of amused me. And it is remarkably difficult to scare up commercial interest in a property of this nature. You go to an agent, you say, I've got this novel in formal verse. It's about Romeo and Juliet, but it's not really. Nobody dies. Everybody winds up in bed with each other. and and they don't seem to think there's a huge market for that, which surprises me, but you never know. Its day will come.
Yeah. So do you self-publish then?
I self-published. Going to the Green Knight is self-published. It's published by Siduri Press, which is my own imprint. In Canada, to get ISBNs, you have to register as a publisher. So I thought, what the heck? I'll become a publisher. Um, I've produced that, and my wife and I have collaborated. My wife is a painter, uh, and I wrote a middle grade reader chapter book that she illustrated. So it's called the Inner Islands Trilogy. Three books about the far future where humans did something to make many animals intelligent and then disappeared. And so you have these communities of diverse creatures, raccoons, otters, a skunk, crows, ravens, and so on, wolves, um, who are getting along in the world. And this is a particular story of finding out where the humans went, what actually happened. And that's self-published as well. I kind of regret that I didn't push that harder with conventional publishing, but how much rejection can one take? Um, I read these stories of authors who were rejected 20, 30, 40 times. And I'm like, 10 or 20 is starting to get to be my limit.
I understand. I actually went fully self-published probably about 10 years ago.
Hmm.
And mostly I I am a huge proponent of if you can do the work yourself, you deserve all the money.
I believe that, yes.
Yeah. So I mean I could do a whole series of shows on my thoughts on self-publishing. But yeah, no. I find it so much more freeing to be self-published and
Yeah, it has not been lucrative, I will say. I'm not one of nature's marketers. Uh, I have worked for myself for many years. I'm a consulting scientist. I know how to market myself as a technologist. I am still really working on how to, to tell people this book is great. This piece of art I've created is the best thing ever. You'll love it. I either through lack of confidence or whatever. It's just a very difficult thing to do. And I don't think I'm alone in this. I think a lot of creators struggle with this. As I said, my wife is a painter. It's been a learning curve for her as well. And we're very fortunate here. Gabriola sells itself as the Isle of the Arts. And we really are there. You can't throw a stick here without hitting an artist or a musician or a writer or an actor. So it has been a very, very supportive community, but it is, I think, still a challenge for many of us to go out there and say, this work is great, you should buy it.
definitely it's a
Yeah.
challenge for me. I think it's probably the number one challenge of everybody I've talked to on the show that it's the
Yeah.
marketing, and I think it's not so much that we are maybe bad at selling ourselves. It's that, and again, I could go on and on, but I think on
Yeah.
the tech side, a lot of the silos in that are built kind of cater to certain types of marketing activities that just don't come naturally for us creators.
What do you have in mind specifically?
Um, like trying to game the algorithms on Facebook and Twitter or X
Oh
and
gosh, yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Just not my thing. I must say I've been on Mastodon for a little over a year now and have found it by far the most writer-friendly platform. It's how we connected
Mhm.
um, of any social media that I've been on. So that has been, and the writing community on Mastodon has, I found, being very positive, very nurturing. You feel visible and you feel, hey, there are these other people out there, some published, some not. And so many of us are dealing with such similar things. I'm not really a community person. I'm an autistic introvert. And Yet, nevertheless, the kind of community that I found on Amazon has been just very positive and enabling, I guess is the word. Yeah.
Definitely. I preach Mastodon to anybody I talk to who we end
Yeah.
up having this conversation because um I've been on it, yeah, about a year myself as well. I set up the AponaAuthor.social server,
Right.
which we're tiny, but I will say if somebody wants to sign up and kind of just get their feet wet and see what it's like,
Yeah.
my server's open to writers, but yeah, it's been amazing.
Yeah. I have been, if I ever go really mad, I've considered setting up a local server for Gabriel Island, just for Islanders, which I think would be a fascinating experience. I can handle the technology end of it, the moderation and the people end of it, I would not be so good at. So I need to collaborate, find someone who was local, who was willing to collaborate on that. We're a very volunteer-run community, so there probably are people out there. And right now, everybody's on Facebook. The community bulletin boards, the communication on Facebook, and having these things in corporate hands is just not great. Uh, I'm I'm not a radical anti-capitalist or anything, but I would like to see us less dependent on these large corporate entities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But As I said, that's probably a whole series of shows in and of
Yes.
itself.
It takes us far afield. Sorry. You said you wanted the conversation to wander organically, and man, I
Yeah.
will wander.
Oh,
It's-
I will too.
yeah.
So, since I was right about the book being connected to Dr. Seuss, I'm guessing because it's Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, it's also Arthurian.
It is, absolutely. And it does follow. So there is a poem, a narrative poem. Maybe it's a romance. This is the sort of thing that medievalists argue about. Is it really a romance? Is it something else? It's a thing. It's itself. Um, there's a poem that was written more or less contemporaneous with the Canterbury Tales in the late 1300s. Uh, do I have that right? Yes, I think so. Um, and it was written by a northern poet, probably. So the dialect is a very different form of Middle English from what we might be used to from Chaucer. And it's written in a form of poetry mostly that's called alliterative verse. So Beowulf, for example, which is the earliest poem in English, so-called, a poem about Beowulf was a Dane, but it's written in Anglo-Saxon, which was the English before the Normans invaded. Uh, these older poems have a form where they're not a metrical verse the way we understand it. They have repeated sounds. And so you would typically, every line is broken into two pieces. There's a caesura, which is what poets call a pause. There's a pause in between the two pieces. And there's a couple of stressed syllables that start with a particular sound in the first half of the line, and one of them is repeated in the second half of the line. So it creates a certain rhythmicity from the sound, the repeated sounds. And that's the verse form of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And the language, even though it's the same time as Chaucer, it's much more difficult to read. I can pretty much manage Chaucerian English uh, okay. I am hopeless if I sit down with the original manuscript of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, a transcription of it. It's very difficult to struggle through. Uh, but there are some great translations. Tolkien did a translation, and there are others. And it tells this strange story of Christmas time at King Arthur's court. All the knights are gathered there and they're drinking and carousing. Sir Gawain is Arthur's nephew, and he doesn't really have a, a he hasn't achieved a lot at this point in his life. He's a younger guy, and he's feeling a little put upon by the other knights. And into this Christmas celebration charges the Green Knight on a green horse, all in green. And there are all these Green Man legends in Northern England and Ireland and Scotland. And the Green Knight probably is reflective of those. The Gawain poet probably was working in Northern Wales. We're not sure. And the Green Knight challenges the Knights of the Round Table to a beheading contest. The deal is one of them can chop off the Green Knight's head. If the Green Knight, if they'll come to the Green Knight the following year and let the Green Knight chop off their head. And this was a thing in medieval tales. And of course, it's always a magical creature. So Gawain steps up, chops the Green Knight's head off, and he doesn't die. He picks his head up, and the head says, come to me next Christmas at the Green Chapel, and rides off. So Gawain's now in a pickle. He has to do something with this. And in the original poem, he lives out the year, he rides off at Christmas, and he comes across this castle, which has a count and a countess and this old lady, a crone. And there's something very mysterious going on. Uh, and he makes a deal with the count of the castle that they will exchange gifts, which was another medieval thing. People would, guests and hosts would agree that whatever they would receive, they would exchange in the 3 days before Christmas, before Gawain rides off to the Green Chapel, which is nearby. And the Countess is trying to seduce Gawain in the midst of all this, and this old lady is kind of hovering around in the background. Gawain manages to avoid seduction, being a noble knight. He and the Count do exchange gifts, and eventually he rides off to the Green Chapel, meets the Green Knight, who takes a couple of whacks at his head, uh, and Gawain experiences his own cowardice. He's he's filled with fear. It's This is the thing that appealed to me about the story, is Gawain is a remarkably human character for some of these medieval romances, and there's a lot of discussion in the literature around the story about, is this a Christian allegory and what does a greenness mean? And he gets a girdle, which is just a rope or a belt from the Countess, is supposed to ward off death. And is this a Christ symbol? I don't know about that. But I know that Gawain is this guy who's trying to do the right thing, and he's scared. And he manages to find the courage to do what he believes to be right. And this breaks a spell. The Green Knight turns out to be the Count, who's had a charm thrown on him by the crone, who was Morgan Le Fay, Arthur's half sister. And all this has jumped on us in the last little bit of the poem. So I've tried to do a little more foreshadowing in my version, but I followed the basic story fairly well. Though those basic elements still exist, except there's this pig. and, and I got the title. I literally was joking around with somebody, and somehow the words Sir Gawain and the Green Knight and Ham came out of my mouth. And I was, what's that about? Are you familiar with Terry Pratchett?
Yeah, mostly through the TV shows, but yeah.
Okay, he wrote one of his early books that he wrote when he was 17 is called The Carpet People, about people living like in our carpets. And for them, it's the world. It's this huge jungle. And he says the book actually came to him because a friend of his was walking around in his house, and he said, "Be careful, you'll disturb the carpet people." And from that whole book group, this was kind of the same. That we get, I think, as creators, we get these threads that just fall from the sky, and if you
Mm-hmm.
pull on them and follow them to see where they lead, uh, an incidental thing like that can take you anywhere. So it was going to be, obviously had to be an anapestic tetrameter because it was like Dr. Seuss because of the Anne Ham. It had to have a pig in it because Anne Ham. Uh, so Gawain in his adventures encounters this wild boar and rescues it, and of course eventually it rescues him, and so on. And one of the things that happened in the course of all this, which is one of my acting mentors used to say that if you're doing art right, it changes you. So you create and you reflect on stuff, right? Well, for me, the process of creation is a process of reflection. You're discovering, you're exploring as you go through this world that you're making up in your head. Uh, so my wife is vegetarian. I'm an omnivore. But by the time I got to this end of this book, I was like, I can't eat pigs anymore. they're they're too smart. They have too much personality. They're too much like us. So that's kind of the concrete change that came out of writing this. Uh, this is what happens. And if you'd asked me getting into it, uh, what do you think the outcome will be? That would not have been on the list, even a little bit. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about the process of creation. It is a process of discovery. It's a process of exploration. We never know what is going to be there when we get to the end of that thread.
Exactly. And I have two pigs here on the homestead. They are pets.
Oh,
And so yeah, I have to admit, I I still do eat pork, but I come from a line of Iowa farmers, so I mean it's kind of baked into my DNA. But yeah,
I yeah, we raised pigs and chickens and turkeys and whatnot when I was growing up, and I've been involved in the process from end to end. Um, and people just have to draw the line,
Yeah.
where they're comfortable with. I am a big advocate of less. I think
Mm-hmm.
I eat less meat than I used to. And I won't, if I'm on the road and traveling and what's on the menu is a bacon burger, I'll eat it. Uh, it's but it's 99% lower than it used to be when it comes to pork. So it's just a journey we're all on, and we have to figure out our way forward, and hopefully support each other in our way forward. I know people who are like, "Oh no, you should be uh, whatever," and I will say, as I said, my wife is a vegetarian. She is highly accepting of where I am on this journey, and I'm deeply grateful for that.
That's wonderful. Yeah. That's kind of where we are too, is, doing less, doing what we can, and
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but I was just gonna say, I taught Truffle, the one who's a pot-bellied pig. She actually sits for a treat like a dog would.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah,
Yeah,
they're very intelligent animals. They really are.
they
Yeah,
are.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I always remember my father going into the pig pen one day to muck things out, and he came back out and he said, they come and they snuffle around my feet and they're friendly and happy. And I think if I fell down unconscious, they'd eat me.
Yep. Yeah, they're kind of like that.
Yeah.
So,
So it is. I've tried. I think in all of our creative work, we try and bring all these aspects of ourselves into the work. Uh, so I've lived in rural areas. I've lived closer to nature, and medieval people lived really close to nature. Uh, so I've tried to use that as much as possible in this particular book, where Gawain's riding around, he's out in the cold, he's taking care of his horse is taking care of him. I've tried to make that experience as authentic as possible, so that one feels you're in the medieval forest, which was a dangerous place. I don't think all the dangers I've imagined were actually there. Wayne rescues the boar from the wild men who hunt in their dreams. They run around in their sleep, and uh, and rescues the boar by waking them up. So I don't think that was necessarily realistic, uh, but I have tried to imbue it with a feeling of authenticity.
well, it sounds wonderful. I know you sent me a copy, and I'm thinking, here on this break between semesters, it might just be like the perfect palate cleanser to
I
dive into.
I hope you enjoy it. I hope you. Yeah, these are things that are not for everyone, I guess. And I know I am kind of an omnivore when it comes to reading. I read across the spectrum, everything from the pulpiest pulp to all the high fancy stuff. And but I know even with that spectrum, there are things I prefer, things I avoid, and I think we're all like that. I am
Mhm.
simply hoping that the people to whom this appeals will eventually be able to find it, which I think is the fundamental marketing problem for all of us as writers. There is a population of enthusiastic readers out there for practically everything. It is a question of catching their notice. And in the cacophony of the modern internet, that is extremely challenging on both sides. As a reader, I will go out looking for a particular type of book. Why can't I find this? I know it's out there. Uh, and recommendation engines, things like this, Goodreads. There's a new site called Hardcover,
Hmm.
um, which is trying to get the wheels turning on a more community-driven basis. Uh, I haven't been, I haven't followed it very much. I'm a member, but I haven't done very much with it. But I think there are some efforts out there who recognize this is a problem. How do we connect the readers to the writers across genres, across the world? Uh, it is an unsolved problem. I don't think generative, you know, large language models are going to solve it for us.
No.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have an account on Bookworm, which is
Okay.
Activity Pub Federated, just like Mastodon.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
I'm going to write that down. Yeah.
Bookworm, WYRM, I think it
Ah,
is. Yeah,
that's great. Yeah.
yeah. I'm not on it very much, and that might be, but I never use Goodreads either, except for just to post my books as an author. So
Yeah.
I know people who swear by Bookworm,
Yeah.
as far as
Okay.
finding books, and so, but yeah, that's the site I'm on, to try to find those other books that people are interested in.
Okay. I will have a look at it.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Get my own books on.
yeah. I am Kit Chicken because it's just a reader account, but I'm Kit Chicken on Bookworm for
Cool.
anybody who's out there that.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if anybody has been listening to this and they think that this book sounds like their cup of tea, which I hope, we've got lots of listeners who do,
Yeah.
I just want to remind everybody that information about TJ's work, about the book, there's a link on the show notes page, that you can go purchase it. Is it just on Amazon or is it wide?
No, it's on Amazon, but worldwide. So Amazon
Okay.
UK, US, Canada, everywhere I could get it.
Okay.
It is on, actually, I'm not sure if it's on the iBook thing or not. Uh, there's an Apple Book
Hmm.
site. I have one or two things up there, but I'm not sure if this is among them. So it's basically on Amazon.
Great. Well, the links are in my show notes. And as we wind up our very fascinating and wide ranging discussion today, would you mind telling our listeners and viewers where they can find out more about you and your work?
Sorry, say that again.
Would
I'm
you,
I'm
it's okay. Would you mind telling our listeners where you can find more about you and your work?
Oh yeah. I my publishing site is siduri.net, SIDURI.net. It's a goddess out of Gilgamesh. Um, is probably the best place to find my work. I don't think I sent you the link for this. I have a Substack called World of Wonders, where I write about science and knowledge and stuff. Uh, and I'm on Mastodon at TJ Radcliffe at mastodon.scot, which happened. I have some family connections to Scotland. I wound up there. And I think those are the primary things. So tjradcliffe.com is a blog and has, my resume and stuff, and some older articles on things. But I've been writing mostly on Substack these days at World of Wonders.
Great. And yes, you sent that link and it is in the show notes.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, just a reminder for programming. We are going to be taking a break the next 2 Wednesdays. We'll come back, if I'm looking at my calendar right, January 3rd, the first Wednesday in January. I want to thank TJ for being here. This has been a fascinating conversation, and I look forward to reading your book and, connecting even further.
Thank you. It's been wonderful. I really appreciate the opportunity and have a great holiday season.
Thank you, and everybody out there too, and you as well. Have a
Thanks.
wonderful holiday season.